Bribery. Definition: corrupt solicitation, acceptance, or transfer of value in exchange for official action. Cornell Law website. A truthful witness saves lives, but he who utters lies is treacherous. Proverbs 14:25. Welcome to Heresy and Hearsay's Reverend Barney sermons. I'm Reverend Barney, and you can follow me on Twitter at SethrothII, and you can follow the show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and any podcast catcher. Just look for Heresy and Hearsay. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow. Also give us a review, because that helps others find us. You can find my partner and better half of the Heresy and Hearsay podcast, September, on Twitch and Twitter at 9 of 12, that's NINEOF12, and hear her on the Geek Grills podcast. Heresy and Hearsay has a Patreon site that you can find at Patreon/Heresy and Hearsay, where you can visit and help support us. Just $2 a month goes a long way to help make this humble show. You can also contribute bits in Twitch and subscribe for free using Amazon Prime when we go live. So today is going to be news. I'm going to discuss, as you can tell by the quotes, the big chunk of this is going to be about the impeachment, and kind of give a timeline of some of the impeachment stuff and everything else. But I want to touch on some other things that have been major, huge news information. So I want to start with the international stuff first, and then go to the national stuff. And I want to start with Prime Minister Benjamin Netenyahu. I'll eventually be able to say that name once in my life correctly. He is the Prime Minister of Israel, and for the past decade, he has been kind of the political force, and he's been the longest Prime Minister in the history of Israel. He is, they are a parliamentary system, and for those who don't know, parliamentary system, while we're a republic, I'm going through this real quick, but while we're a republic, basically, we are a two-party system, though there are other parties that sometimes show up on the voting, especially in the presidential. And I'll get to that when I get to the debates and stuff here in a little bit, about my thoughts on that kind of situation. But a parliamentary system is multi-partied, and they basically, for the most part, you can look at England, which we'll hit on in a minute, but and basically what they do is then whoever has the majority has to then form a government. They are about to have they're going to have to end up having their third election within a year in Israel, because there was an election called, and when the election was called, there was no definitive winners in the election. So they have failed now. This has been two elections. They have failed twice to form governments, which means that they have to have another election to try to get this resolved. But in the meantime, since I want to say 2016, it's been a 3-year investigation. Prime Minister Netanyahu was under a probe for corruption, bribery, things of that nature, which brings to the definition. And basically, during his time as Prime Minister, him and his wife has received over $260,000 worth of gifts in exchange for political favors. There's been an indictment that has finally been put out, stating that of such. And this puts a lot more. He's been under this cloud for a while, for 3 years, and the evidence kept mounting and mounting. Yet he would still be getting votes, and his party would be getting votes. And because he's head of his party, he's the person that would then be elected as prime minister by his party. And so that's been kind of the problem the last year, is that while the party is still popular with a lot of the Israelis, they are very right wing. His party, they're very, very right wing. In the last decade or so, the Palestinian lands have been invaded, for lack of a better term. I'm sure there's better terms, but basically they're being taken by Israel, and these were Palestinian lands that people are being forced off of, militarily forced off of, so that Israel could expand their landmass in certain areas, which was the Gaza and the West Strip. So basically, and here's how the governments of the Palestinians work: is that Gaza has its own government, which is ran by Hamas, and the West Strip has its own, which is ran basically by a different group. So they've almost split the country into 3 countries during this shift. And the shift has been happening for a while. It was happening well before this, but it's been really hyped up. And the best example I can give historically, so that Americans can understand why this is a bad thing, is basically how the American government went into more and more Native American indigenous lands, taking it over and claiming it as their own, and pushing the Native Americans more and more onto these isolated islands of what we now know as reservations. And if you know anything about the life of reservations, that is basically what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians in the same way. They are basically putting them on these smaller and smaller reservations that are poorer and poorer, with less job opportunities and everything else. And the problem is that if you look historically throughout these situations, the more young people are unable to fend for themselves, to have families, to get money, to get jobs, to basically live a normal life, the more and more likely that these individuals are going to turn to, I hate to use the word radicalized. I don't like that term because it has now become so synonymous with terrorism versus other things. But they basically become more disheartened, more impulsive, and they're trying to find their own path. And by trying to find their own path, sometimes they do desperate things. I'm not saying terrorist acts are a good thing by any stretch of imagination. I'm not. Because here's the thing: most Israelis just want to live their lives in peace, just like most Palestinians. And terrorism is focusing on most, are to scare and shock people. The problem with terrorist acts when you're in that country, as you see like with the IRA and England and the terroristic acts that happened at that point, is that it causes people to become hardened to the to the plight of people who are suffering. And the problem is that it doesn't always work. It doesn't work because then because the people who are being terrorized become more hardened against those individuals, and those individuals become more and more desperate acts, which then hardens even harder, and it becomes this horrible loop at that point. So that is one of the reasons why the Israel is such a complicated situation with the Palestinians, because a lot of people are looking, and a lot of countries look at what Israel has been doing over the last 10 years, with Netanyahu being the source of that information, or the source of that hardening. That their policies have become very close to civil rights and human right violations, because forcing people off of their land by military and forcing people into these situations is difficult to quantify as a good act, because it's not. It's basically it's a human rights violation, and America is the only ones that aren't right now with this administration that don't really see it as such. Israel has very few true backers at this point. America is one of the few, but that is problematic because most of it is held by the evangelical right, because of a misreading and misunderstanding of Revelations, and feeling that what needs to happen is all this stuff needs to happen for the second coming of Christ. Not realizing that the book of Revelations was basically discussing Nero and Rome more than it was about the future. It was discussing the future, but it was discussing the future about Nero and Rome and things of that nature, versus it about a future with the Antichrist and all that kind of stuff. And you have to understand, rapture is really not in the Bible that much. The Antichrist is really not in the Bible that much. There's been a lot of speculation and other writings that they have gone to for this kind of information for the evangelical right. I mean, whereas like the Catholic Church does, the Protestant Church, especially the evangelical, like the Baptist and the Church of God and the Pentecostal, especially those specific denominations, look at Revelations and revere Revelations a lot harder than the Lutherans or the Episcopals or the Methodists, though they're a hardline Methodist, but they're a hardline everybody, or the Catholic Church, who sees it more as the talking about Rome versus talking about a far, far future. So that is one of the reasons why the U.S. why there's such a hard contingency to always support Israel, no matter what they do or what they say or how they act in a lawful manner, because there are laws that have been written about how to treat people, and this is why certain individuals don't leave their homelands ever, because of the fact that they could very easily be arrested for human rights violations. That's why there's the Hague, and it's become synonymous with handling human rights violations. So Israel has a lot of things going on right now. Netanyahu, I don't know. It's going to be a slow process because of this at this point, especially considering the fact that there's not really a sitting parliament to enact or react to any of this. So that is going to be a problem, especially with a new election that's going to have to be called. So the next topic that I want to jump to, the next overall topic I want to jump to, again in the international field, is Brexit and the UK elections, because there has been a call for the UK elections, which is on December 12th, if I remember correctly from my reading. And so basically the situation is that the EU has once again extended the Brexit negotiations, or the Brexit deal, until the 31st of January 2020. Right now, Boris Johnson is running, and he's running on Make Brexit Happen. That is his quote-unquote drumbeat term. Like, make America great. Make Brexit happen. You can see that there's a pattern with some of these leaders here. Because, and I forgot to mention this on the Netanyahu thing, so let me bring it up real quick, and then I'll dive real deep into the Brexit stuff. Is one of the things Netanyahu called during this probe was that it was a 3-year probe, and basically during that time frame he called it a witch hunt. I wonder, you see the connection here? Do you see how these leaders connect? The main difference I want to stress about Netanyahu is he's not stupid. He's not a blithering idiot. He's narcissistic as all. So that causes certain levels of problems, especially when dealing with facts that are against the narrative a narcissist has in their head. But you can see where all of this, there is a lot of connections as far as the right wing in the world and how they view opposition. That being said, getting back to Brexit and Boris Johnson, who I don't think Boris Johnson is as big of a buffoon as he makes himself out to be on television. He does that for a reason. He does that because that allows a certain level of ha-ha kind of thing, and to brush away his whatever. So when he is now running, he was never elected as a prime minister. There's been a few in the time. Winston Churchill was elected well after his first term to be prime minister. So this is a general election. So here's the thing about general elections in the UK. The UK is that you finish your filings, and then you have basically 5 weeks to campaign. I kind of like that, especially considering we're on our 5th Democratic debate right now, and we'll get to that in a second, but that's just exhausting when you think about all of that going on. So the basic understanding and everything is that a no Brexit, and people like John Oliver and stuff like that, has made a much better understanding of what those situations are. But basically, the situation, if there's a no deal Brexit, it means that it's a disaster for Britain. That the British economy would basically tank in a great way. Because there are people that are working because of how the EU works. There's basically a semi-open border policy, and so there would be a lot of workers that would have to leave suddenly. There would also be trade would come to a standstill. There would be because there would be stuff that is on the docks or coming by ship into England, that there would be a lot less that they would basically sit there, and if it's produce or whatever, that it would sit there and rot because they would have to figure out how to do all these trades, how to do the tariffs, how to do everything else on the fly at that point versus having some kind of deal. So that is one sticking point as far as the Brexit. The other and major sticking point that keeps causing issues is Northern Ireland versus Ireland. And this is very a historic thing that you have to understand is that Northern Ireland is part of UK, while Ireland is part of the EU. So if there is a no deal, or even if there is a deal, and basically borders have to be hardened at that point, you're going back to the 1970s and 1980s for hard borders between Ireland and Northern Ireland, something that was a huge, huge problem. All you have to do is look at the 80s and the terror and the terroristic attacks of the IRA and the just the bloodshed, because now all of a sudden you've got these hard borders again. That is a huge fear and concern. They want to keep that border open because there are family. It would basically be like erecting the Berlin Wall all over again, but in Northern Ireland. That was part of the problem with Northern Ireland at the point, is because there are families that are on both sides and all that kind of stuff, and the open border, the openness of a border really helps keep those tensions down. And then there's also the problem that Scotland wants to stay in the EU, but is part of the UK. And I have a feeling that if there is an actual separation, because here's the thing. At this point, a lot of people who voted for that referendum, there was a referendum voted for Brexit to happen. The prime minister at the time, his name is escaping me right now, but the prime minister at the time basically stated that he was going to put this referendum up, and if it won, he would resign, and at least he did that part. But yeah, it won because the people who were pushing for Brexit was like the UKIP party and several other those very right wing, very I don't know if I want to say white supremacists, because I don't know if that's a thing in England, but basically racists, who wanted people from other countries to be out. And you have to understand that there are a lot of people from impoverished parts of the EU, and there's also a lot of immigrants from Somalia, from northern Africa, who have come up, and because they have been given protection by the EU, are able to live there and everything. And so these individuals are trying to basically close off those borders, which really isn't harming England any. Their economy is doing okay. They would be doing a lot better if they got rid of the austerity measures that have been going on, as far as that is concerned. The right wing party, and I think they're the Tories, understand foreign policy. I know a little foreign policy, but it is not my strong point. My strong point is religion. So, but there's been an influx of Muslims and stuff that have been in the city. In fact, London recently elected a Muslim mayor, and there's that whole thing with Donald Trump about him. So, yeah, there's been some problems in England, especially there's been some radicalization of those individuals who are, and again, I hate that term, but basically hardening of some of the UK first people. That's what UKIP is basically, but UK first or the white UK first people trying to rebelling against these Muslims being allowed to come in and stuff like that. So that becomes the problem at that point for them, is what do you do about situations like that and how you handle that. So the UK, they put this referendum up to try and it passed. And now a lot of people who didn't really understand or were duped by how it was more focused on trying to keep England in charge, or that England had given up its autonomy, and it hadn't. It's basically a giant trade agreement that does allow for people to cross borders easier, but it is basically a giant trade agreement. It's not that England is giving up control of how they do things. I mean, they kept their own currency versus the EU, who has the euro. England still has the pound and everything else, and they have to abide by how their rules are, because they're not fully EU. They're partial. They're considered part of the EU, but they're also a bit different. Like you still have to their passport system is slightly different than going to the EU passport and border system, how that is set up. So, but it's not as nearly problematic as it for other travelers as it would be. It's kind of like how the Canadian border was before 9/11, and I can attest to that because I've been to Canada a couple of times, one time specifically, I should say, and you stop, you're asked a couple of questions, and you go through. That's how it was. Now you have to have a passport to get in, even to get into Canada. So it's so but so it's basically, it was more like that for England and the UK and the EU versus what it would be now, which is basically going back and forth between Mexico and having to have a passport and being a very hard wall or a hard border. These are soft borders, so that people can pass through a lot easier, a lot more trade can happen, things like that. And so when it was voted on to get out to do Brexit, and you look at the polling now, basically, if a new referendum would come up, the polling says that the referendum would be to stay in the EU, and it would be very large amounts, because the individuals who voted on this, again, weren't paying full attention. And that's most people. Most people don't pay attention as far as the politics are concerned. They get sound bites and stuff like that because you're working and you've got family and you're trying to do all of this. The last thing you can do is sit down for 3 hours a week or 3 hours a night and just go through all the political stuff and find out exactly what's going on. So with that being said, that becomes a problem. That becomes problematic, because then if you can get the right sound bites in, and that's why Trump did really well, because of the sound bites and everything, and how he was covered. He was covered so much more than his rivals, if you just look at the news coverage, because he was saying such outlandish things, but these things were like exciting, and they were sucking up all the oxygen. That was basically the same thing with Brexit. Is it that all of these falsehoods or all of these lies and everything was being sucking up all the oxygen, because serious news people were basically stating the fact that, hey, this is problematic, this is a lie, this is not true, this is not true, this is not what happens. And so when that starts happening over and over and over again, then the narrative of, even though these statements are coming out and then people are saying these are wrong. It's the statements that people remember versus, and it's the stunts that people remember. And that's why, like, make Brexit happen is such a strong thing, because it is very punchy. There's a picture, and I'll be posting these in the notes in the YouTube comments and on the website when September gets a chance to do that, because she is my tech wizard. She's just brilliant. But when you look at it, there's a picture of Boris Johnson wearing a pair of blue gloves, because while our liberals are blue and the Republicans are red. I believe it's flipped in England because, of course, why can't we just pick a color? But anyway, he's wearing these blue gloves that are boxing gloves. It's like, and it says, make Brexit happen, or get Brexit done. I'm sorry, it's the term, and it's very punchy. And that's why he's wearing so that it brings home that it's very punchy. And it is. It's very punchy, very quick, and nuance gets lost on the general electorate. Sorry. And so when you're looking at all of that situation and you're listening to what's being said, the punchy stuff sticks. It is designed to do that. It's been marketed, remarketed. Some people call it propaganda. Some people call it marketing. But it's been designed in such a way that it sticks, and nuance is completely lost. Okay, so let's shift gears now to national politics. And I have not watched the debates. I have not watched the last debate or anything like that. I will be perfectly honest. I will say that my mind is already made up, and that's fine. And here's what I want to say. Okay. About the election and everything else is that whoever is the nominee, I will support. I will be more inclined to be excited about a Elizabeth Warren or even a Bernie Sanders, though he has some problems for me. But I would be more excited for an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders than I would be for a Biden or Pete Buttigieg. I don't know. He's more problematic than I thought. He's becoming more and more problematic. There's been a lot of stuff coming on about him lately that it scares me more than I can say. And I would prefer not to have to deal with that, because there are certain situations that bother me a great deal about him. And Mayor Pete may be charismatic and all this kind of stuff, but he's extremely problematic right now. Between, the stuff that's been going on as far as his police department and his city and everything else. Just look up some of the information that's been going on about him and make your own judgment. But for myself, he's very problematic. Joe Biden, Uncle Joe. I like Uncle Joe, I do, but Uncle Joe needs to sit out. And the prime example I will give of why he needs to sit out and everything is that he's a gaffe machine by just nature. It's the way he's always been. But they were talking about domestic violence, and he basically said we need to keep punching the society, keep punching that kind of information, keep punching and punching. And I'm like, you're talking about domestic violence and you're using the term punching. I know what he was referring to, that we need to keep working on getting this resolved and keep working on the cultural zeitgeist about men versus women and all of that kind of stuff. But really punching Joe, really punching, you're saying punching Joe. Oh, Joe. But so here's what I want from a candidate, and here's where we may not get it, depending on how things play out in the next couple of months, because there's been some new shakeups. You would think that by December, because the caucuses are in by November, because the caucuses are in January. The caucus, Iowa caucus, and then the New Hampshire and the South Carolina are basically in January, February. That we would be whittling down the field and there'd be less people. And there are, but now there's been one person who has jumped in, and I can't remember his name, but I'm going to talk about him. And then there's Mike Bloomberg, who is thinking about jumping in. The first person, and again, I think he was the governor of Massachusetts, and I can't remember his name. But from all the political pundits and all the political analytics and that kind of information that I've been seeing, him jumping in to the race is less about him actually being able to win and more of making sure that Joe doesn't get blown out in New Hampshire. The thing is, so right now Warren and Sanders are your two biggest opponents against Biden, and Biden right now is struggling and dropping, and he's struggling because of the gaffes and everything else, and his comments about race was but it's, between that, the women, and he's problematic about the Me Too movement, because he has a problem with personal space, especially with women. And there's been video put up multiple times about the multiple times where women, where he'll hug a woman or touch a woman and stuff, and it's like, it's not okay. And you see a lot of that. So right now, Bernie and Warren together could run away with Iowa and could run away with New Hampshire. And if that happens, Joe is dead in the water. Biden will not be able, Vice President Biden will not be able to overcome that. So by the time he gets to South Carolina, it's down to Warren and Sanders at that point. And really, it's almost a coin flip on which would be better. I would prefer that it would be Warren again, but that's my take on it. However, that being said, the establishment, the what's known as neoliberalism, the more corporate friendly Democratic Party, the more corporate friendly party, is less inclined for either of those two individuals, especially because both of them have huge plans on implementing tax policies that would hinder the growth, or hinder billionaires continuing to be billionaires and make huge amounts of money for silly, ridiculous reasons. They have billions of dollars, they invest billions of dollars, they make billions more back. So this has been a situation that, so those two individuals, Bloomberg and the former governor of Massachusetts, basically are stopgap measures, as far as a lot of the pundits, the left leaning pundits that I really listen to. They're seeing them more as a stopgap measure to make sure that Joe isn't blown out in New Hampshire. Because if he's blown out in New Hampshire, They pretty much, a lot of people agree that there's not many roads left at that point. So, and if they can get to a broker convention, even at that point, then more than likely it's going to be Sanders. And if they get closer and we hear the words broker convention, I'm terrified. I'm scared to death because at that point it becomes a bloody fight on the floor. And when it becomes that kind of a fight on the floor, then the only people that really win in that situation is the other party. And right now, the other party is the tangerine Mussolini. So the mango Mussolini. I am sorry, that is the correct term. You know, Donald J. Trump. Speaking of well, before I do that, so there is one thing I do want to touch on real quick is for those individuals who follow, this is also going to be a huge Senate year and a chance to flip the Senate to blue as well. A Democratic president will have no chance of getting any substance things passed if there is a Republican Senate. It still may be difficult if it's not a supermajority. But even if it's not a supermajority, but it's still a Democratic Senate, it's a lot easier to get things done. The problem comes in is that who is vulnerable and who's not. And right now, if you had asked me a month ago if Mitch McConnell was vulnerable, I'd say no because he's so entrenched. However, and I understand that the governor of Kentucky is not as popular, but then again, Mitch McConnell's not very popular there right now, especially with the coal miners and things that are going on with the coal miners there, or former coal miners, that he may be vulnerable. And there is a candidate by the name of Amy McGrath. She is a combat Marine and a combat veteran. She's flown several, like dozens and dozens of combat missions for the Marines, especially against ISIS and Al Qaeda. So, she is a combat veteran. She's a veteran, highly decorated. And she is not as liberal as I'd like her to be. She's a bit more hawkish than I would want her to be. But it is a Democrat in that House, and more importantly, I would just love to see Mitch McConnell lose. Oh my gosh, to see him lose, and not just lose the majority, but lose his own seat. And honestly, Mitch McConnell it has his own corruption issues. They just can't seem to. There's no will for it, and everything to do anything about it. But yeah, there are a lot of skeletons in that turtle's closet. So the main event tonight, or whenever you decide to listen or watch this, is the impeachment. So I am going to give my best timeline of the events as far as what we know as far as the impeachment is concerned. So I am going to start sort of back a little bit to give some history and go from there. And then we'll discuss the impeachment hearings and what's been going on. I'm not going to remember everybody's names or who all testified. I have not been able to watch everybody who testified. I've watched clips and I've watched analysis and everything else. I've done the best I could. But I am one human being that does not have a research team and has to work a regular job instead of having this as my full-time job. You can change that with your pledges, because I would love to do this full time. It would be a daily thing at that point, but that's a dream. So right now, So I haven't been able to. I've been reading as much as I can, and everything, and doing it and seeing analysis and stuff like that. So that being said, so I'll start in 2014. This is from the New York Times, and I'm sorry, the L.A. Times. Is basically a timeline, and that'll be in the comments. But basically, what happened is the Obama administration started funneling money into Ukraine after the uh, 2014 revolution happened, which basically got rid of a corrupt prime minister, corrupt president. I apologize, and basically was designed to, at that point, what brought them more in line with the EU and NATO and the United States. So one of the things that happened in 2014 after doing that is that uh, Vice President Biden was in charge of helping get that government back and helping create the government, or not create the government, but helping facilitate certain things so that the government could stand on its own 2 feet and everything. But at the same time, his son Hunter joined the board of the basically a private natural gas company in the Ukraine, whose name is I'm not going to try to pronounce because I've been failing at pronunciations all night. But it did raise some concerns because it could be a possible conflict of interest. And the thing is, during that time frame, it was being investigated for possible financial abuses and everything else. Um, However, Hunter was not part of that investigation at that time. So let's jump to 2015, where basically the Obama administration and its allies pressures Ukraine to remove its prosecutor. The reason for that is because the prosecutor was seemingly corrupt, either by the money that was being given to him by the gas company, or by the fact that he may have had ties to Russia himself or anything like that. So eventually, and they voted out. Um, they voted him out in 2016. In 2009, so we jump ahead. um, to 2019, where Lazinski was elected to lead the Ukraine. At that point, things start going ahead, and Giuliani basically was the spearhead of this, and he was basically saying that he wanted, pardon me, that he wanted, you know, they're basically to have the new president of the Ukraine to start a new investigation on the Bidens, and to see if there was any corruption or anything like that, because there was this. So instead, because during the Russian probe, there was this conspiracy theory that has been debunked completely by this point. During the Russian probe, there was this conspiracy theory that it wasn't Russia that was trying to get involved in the elections, but it was actually people in the Ukraine that were trying to affect the elections, which seems ridiculous because the Ukraine was on positive footing with the United States versus the Russia, and was getting aid from the Ukraine, from U.S. The Ukraine was getting aid from the U.S. and everything else, as far as that's concerned. So that being said, there was a concerted effort to try to make this a more realistic, or try to bring this to the forefront as far as this conspiracy theory. So one of the things to kind of link that together was to try to have the fact that Hunter was part of this board and everything else, and that Joe Biden was the individual that was helping build the election as far as or build the government back up from the previous administration in Ukraine and everything else, was trying to use that as a cornerstone to expand that so that it would muddy the waters as far as the probe and everything else. That basically, while not proving that there was a direct connection, there was a lot of other problematic dealings that President Trump had done during the Mueller investigation and during the Mueller probe. So, to offset that, they were trying to get the Ukraine to basically state that they were going to open up this investigation, and as the cherry to get them to state that they're going to open up this investigation against a political rival, was that Congress bipartisan voted to have funds sent to Ukraine to help them in their war effort against Russia, in Crimea and things like that, to get them to basically protect the border and stuff like that. So so that was all going on at the same time. Giuliani was basically trying to get Lewinsky to agree to this and everything else. And then July 25th, there was the phone call that basically Trump would directly ask for a favor when discussing military aid, and that that would basically at that point would allow the funds to, because he had frozen the funds, to allow the funds to go through, and would also have a meeting with the president, because it was very important for the Ukrainian president. They felt in Ukraine that if the Ukrainian president had a meeting at the White House with President Trump, that gave them some political coverage, some political power when it came to, especially with Russia, that it would give them some more backing from the other individuals with the EU. But as the phone call with the transcripts, that isn't the complete and total transcripts as it states on the transcript, but basically it still said, hey, you do us this favor and sure, we'll release the funds for you, but we need you to do this, we need you to do this favor. It's come out that basically there was a interview set up with the president of the Ukraine and I'm not even going to pronounce his name, an anchor on CNN. He's their foreign policy specialist. He does his. You can look up all this thing, but basically he gives a timeline of what was going on. They had set up this interview, all this kind of stuff, and then in this time frame, that's when the whistleblower information came out. That's when the call to Sunderland the day after the whistleblower information was given to the intelligence committees all came out, and then eventually this all happening in the background of this interview being set up with CNN, and because it needed to be American, it needed to be on American television. And it needed to be the president saying this. This is basically the testimony that's gone on in the past 2 weeks. Basically, is stated that was the criteria. Is that it needed to be American television, basically CNN, because they're considered sort of the neutral of the three major cable networks. That it needed to be American television. It needed to be the president stating that the president of the Ukraine stating they were opening up this investigation with against Hunter and Joe Biden because for corruption. And even if the investigation found nothing, the fact that a foreign country had opened up investigations would be so problematic for Joe's political endeavor right now, that it would have sank him. And you have to remember, this is before Gaffamanias have been happening and all this kind of stuff. And Joe looked to be the one that was going to win the nomination. Of course, things are now a lot less clear. And here's the thing: when this came out, when everything was brought out, it actually helped Joe. So I don't think this was the reason why his polling has been going down a little bit, or why he looks less electable in a lot of people's eyes. So that being said, so when all of this started happening and everything else, Trump released the funds, and there was no interview. The interview was canceled. In fact, the reporter says that he was in Ukraine, setting, basically trying to get the last couple of things set up, and was going to do the interview in a day or so after, and everything just went radio silent, and everything fell apart because the funds were released. So he didn't have to give the quid to get the quo, because all of this looked so problematic. So what the Democrats are doing, and yes, and people talk about this and say that this is a show trial and stuff like that. And it is. It's in my lifetime, I have seen now 2 impeachment hearings going on, which is unusual for anybody seeing. There was not even really one for Nixon. There was starts of it. Votes haven't exactly happened, but the pre investigation was ramping up in full gear, and there was going to probably be a vote, so it'll probably happen. So you can count that one. And then the other one that happened in American history was Andrew Johnson right after the Civil War. So we haven't had a lot of these impeachment hearings for presidents. 4 of them, and 3 of them has happened in the last, 40, 50 years at this point? Yeah, so, and 2 of them has happened within my lifetime. Clinton was impeached. He was just not found guilty. That's why he was still in office the rest of the time, because it kind of blew up in their faces. I think if you look at the impeachment hearings of Clinton, and if you saw what happened, and I'm going to do a little compare and contrast. The reason why the Republicans have been after Clinton for years and years and years, and I know that kind of looks the same as far as what was going on with Trump, but the difference was not so much that there was like national security issues, or that there was like problems that would have happened as far as country situation. It was more of possible investments, stuff like that. Things that right now is going on so much in our with our president right now. The fact that his kids have top secret clearance and are making all of these deals for hotels, for makeup deals, whatever the case may be that they're doing. These are things that was part of that investigation with Clinton, and they basically came down to that he lied, that he basically perjured himself in the court of law when he was talking about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And that is problematic, because if you look on the back, if that trial happened and everything else, I think, I know it's only been 30 years roughly, but the zeitgeist and the change of attitude towards President Clinton and what he has done, and using his power and influence against these women. Yeah, people call him a racist, a rapist, and stuff like that, and that could be quite possible, and quite probable. I don't know. I haven't looked back in all the information, but nowadays, yeah, I think that the Senate did not do the right thing, and they should have impeached him too, and like removed him from office, because that's where the difference is, and we'll get to that in just a second. So, basically, Sunderland Ambassador Sunderland, who was the EU ambassador, who had some political ties to Democrats and Republicans and everything else, but gave basically $1 million to Trump's inauguration, was put as an ambassador of the EU. I have a personal problem with like donors and stuff getting like, EU is fairly important. You get like an ambassadorship to like, the Virgin Islands or something, that kind of situation. That's kind of, and I, even then, I don't like, because I feel that's a bit quid pro quo in a lot of ways to me. I think it's problematic to be giving individuals certain uh, certain things like ambassadorships for their money that they gave for a political campaign or whatever, or them being part of the political campaign themselves. They get, a nice cushy ambassadorship. I no, I don't like that at all. I really don't. But that's neither here nor there. That's right now how our politics work. But so Sunderland, who was the EU ambassador, had to work with Giuliani, and he basically stated that yes, there was a quid pro quo, that and basically now what Trump came out yesterday, and this is being recorded on the 21st. So what Trump did yesterday is he basically when the phone call happened that Trump talked about in his press conference, he basically stated that that when he called, he asked the president, an open-ended question, "What did you want?" And the president said, "I want I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I just want him to do what is right." That is the exact quote. Here's the thing with that quote: is first off, is like that came the day as the whistleblower information was being handed over to Congress. He was probably well aware of that, because I'm sure that Representative Nunes ran over to President, or texted him, or whatever the case may be. But basically, someone let him know, hey, this information there's a whistleblower about that phone call that people are saying, there was a quid pro quo ask. So this phone call was basically just kind of opportunistic. It just happened at the right time. And Trump was basically trying to cover his own ass at that point. However, if you look at all the evidence, and Sunderland basically put the spotlight on it, made it extremely clear, there was a quid pro quo set up here as far as Ukraine to get the funds that was already promised to them by Congress but was frozen by the president, was that they had to investigate the Bidens. End of story. That's what that was. Had to come out, state they were doing that, and start the investigation. And at least pretend to start an investigation. So, what do we have here? What do we have as a nation? Well, we have a Congress that is divided. And so the impeachment will probably go through, and then be taken up by the Senate. Now, this could affect the presidential elections, because if they're having a trial, which can take a couple of months, that is early primary caucus time, and Senator Warren, Senator Sanders, Senator Klobuchar, Pamela Harris. No, she's a representative, but these people would be forced to go to this trial and have to sit there through the trial while they should be campaigning. Ultimately, unless the Republican Party somehow gets a spine, finds that they're supposed to be doing a job for the country and not for their party, President Trump is still going to be president when it's all said and done. It'll be party line down the middle. What this will do, however, is this may open up those individuals like Susan Collins and a lot of people that are in purplish states, to possibly lose their Senate seats because they're up for re-election. It may cause Mitch McConnell to lose his Senate seat because right now, like I said, it still leans Republican, but it's not mostly Republican. And so there's a good chance that, this could shift and everything else. And honestly, he could lose this one. The probability is smaller, but it's still possible that he could lose that one. So with all of that, you have to look at what is going on, what is being said, and what is being done in the impeachment hearings to see that the Republicans on the impeachment hearings is doing everything, and everybody else is basically doing everything they can that is on the right. To ignore it, to not see the quid pro quo, or say that the quid pro quo is, it's not problematic, it's not a problem, it's not a big deal, or whatever. They're because it's done all the time, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of moving parts on the Republican side to try to move that goalpost, but unfortunately that goalpost was originally set by them. Ben Shapiro stated that, no moving the goalpost. There has to be a quid pro quo, no moving the goalpost for anything else. So what he was basically saying is there's no lying or whatever. And there are even some that are saying, and that's why I read the legal definition of bribery, and I'll read it again so that everybody understands exactly what it means. And this is from the Cornell Law website. I'll be posting a link to that as well. But it's like it's a corrupt solicitation, which means you just have to ask. Acceptance, meaning receiving, or transfer of value in exchange for official action. So let's break that down. So basically, corrupt, fine. Solicitation, meaning that you're asking for something while you are in office to give something that is of official action. So what President Trump was trying to do was was requesting for an investigation against one of his political opponents, and the investigation was from a foreign power. So not only is that is international issue, and basically ruining the sovereignty of this nation, or degrading it, but it's also a political, and personal, not a U.S. bank sanctioned. We need to do this to make sure that there's no ill parties or anything like that. There's no parties that are being influenced or whatever. That it is not an official action, to make sure that things are going. That the corruption is not focused for personal gain, as far as the corruption investigation is concerned. This is about his request to get for personal gain, for personal political gain. And personal political gain is different than national political gain. Because national political gain is that we know that this company is not corrupt, or this company is not being ran by Russia or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, that is basically what the situation is here. Is that this was a solicitation? Doesn't mean there had to be a quo for the quid to be asked for. If the quid is asked for, that is bribery, and that is in the Constitution as part of how someone can be impeached. Is bribery. There's a couple other things, and then high crimes and misdemeanors. So to request a bribe is of itself a crime, is illegal, and therefore is impeachable. So what the Republican Party is trying to do is they're trying to say, no, it's not, because nothing happened, because the funds were released, because the quo happened without the quid being happened. If the quid is requested, that is all that matters. And that's where we are right now. Is the bribe was requested. It's like, hey man, you do this investigation, we'll give you the money so you can then buy our weapons, because that makes sense. We're going to give you money to give us money. Just give them the. I don't want people to have weapons, but on the same thing, I understand the aid would be for other things too. Probably pay for soldiers or whatever. But part of it was to buy our weapons. We were going to give them money so that they could give it back to us. Okay. So that's where the situation is right now, as far as that's concerned. Is it doesn't matter that the bribery actually happened. The bribery was requested, and that's where we are as far as this is concerned. Now, what does that mean? Well, it honestly depends on when as far as the Senate and everything else, because if it's voted, here's the thing: if it is voted on before Christmas, then the Senate will take it up at the first of the year, and that's where the problem comes as far as the Democratic side of the election and everything else. During that time frame, however, it may come to be, because Sunderland also named a lot of names, including the vice president, including Bolton at the time, secretary of, who was the former governor of Texas, and his name is escaping me right now, Rick Perry. There we go. Secretary Perry was in the know. There was a lot of people in the know with this situation, and in fact, one of the lines that keeps being repeated is that Bolton kept telling people that they need to go and talk to the NSA lawyer, because and be put on record that they're not involved with basically what the quote unquote Giuliani's drug deal. And it's not a drug deal, but it's basically that same situation. So that's where we are as far as that is concerned. That is what's going on in this situation. So I'm going to end tonight. I'm hoping to get another one up in a couple of days. I don't know what it'll be about, something. We're going to be doing, we'll be doing the union thing next week. There's just been a lot of communication issues as far as, and problems as far as us getting together to be able to record for the union one. We'll do the union one next week, and we may even hit a few Thanksgiving things at the end of the union thing, or we may not, but that's fine. And then we'll do the environment, and then we'll figure out what to go from there. But so I want to end this. I wanted to give you a bit of an update as far as the housekeeping is concerned. But, I want to thank you for joining us at Heresy and Hearsay. I'm Reverend Barney. You can follow me on Twitter at SethRothII. You can also find the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and podcast, as well as our website. Just Google us. Don't forget our Patreon page, where $2 a month can help keep us going. You can find my partner, September, on Twitch and Twitter at 9 of 12. You can hear her on the Geek Girls podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Try and do one selfless act today and be blessed. And I say this into the night: let us not forget, there is hope.